was praised as the most eerie. Joan Baez has a lovely voice in America, captured the attention of a generation, yet behind the love affairs behind the curtain with celebrities such as Steve Jobs, Bob Dylan, and performances next to Martin Luther King. Now, at age 83, a harsher truth was beginning to emerge. The renowned folk singer has exchanged sold-out performances for rehabilitation and quiet for a tree's branches, which she refers to as she lives in tranquil seclusion as a counselor, conversing with plants that are dozing in a treehouse and battling the specters of a childhood destroyed by the actions of her father, who was formerly admired, is a beautiful, devastating turn in the tale of a former justice-singing woman who is just now starting to confront her own Joan. The narrative of Baez started long before she hit her first performance on stage. Her dad, Albert Baez, was incredibly intelligent. The X-ray was developed by a physicist microscope during his time at Stanford, but what truly stood out to him, it was his brains, but it was also his strong sense of morality. Throughout the Cold War, he declined alluring job offers in the defense industry since he didn't. Rather than working on weapons, he took on lower-paying, quieter employment at universities, and Joan would work with UNESCO subsequently declare, "We would never have all the lovely and superfluous things that our small girls want as they grow older. But we might have a dad who has a distinct conscience." This dedication to the appropriate action would be incorporated into growing up. Joan's own heritage: the family relocated frequently, and one of the most noteworthy visits was to Baghdad, where her father was assisting with the science setup. University programs. At just 10, Joan, who was years old, was thrust into a world full of stark differences. She recalled coming in the sweltering heat, amid confusion, and witnessing a beggar receiving police brutality at the airport, and she saw folks in the months that followed searching through trash while children play on the streets, and the mistreatment of animals. At that time, she perused the journal of Anne Frank and became ill for several years. She would later reflect and remark, "Our young spirits witnessed the same sights, but arrived at various findings. I carried that burden from that year, remained with her, truly helped her see things and made her more sympathetic." After returning to Joan from California, began to observe other injustices in her environment. Despite the fact that she was Mexican and born in New York, background frequently gave her the impression that children who didn't belong at school called. Despite being a dumb Mexican, she didn't completely blend in among the kids from Mexico. Considering that she didn't speak Spanish, it helps to feel torn between two realities. Increase her awareness of right and wrong. Was unwelcome and brown, she stated, but I understood that there were more serious problems for the black community. This insight would influence her decisions in the future, such as when she declined segregated jobs, Southern white audiences, and made the decision to should instead perform at institutions of higher learning that are black, even if doing so put her career at peril. A strong impact came in the Quaker faith throughout Joan's lifetime. When her family became Quakers at the age of 8. Community renowned for their profound dedication to justice and peace, their values soon become her own. Recalled hearing conversations about the dinner table discussion on morality, peace, and conflict choices when she was 15 years old. She heard a Martin Luther King Jr. Baez address that caused her to cry shortly after she declined to take part in a Cold War air battle raid drill at school that involves a silent act. She was featured in the local paper for her defiance and signaling the beginning of her advocacy. And something spectacular happened in the summer of 1959. Occurred at the inaugural Newport Folk Festival. A girl of 18 named Joan Baez, without a record deal or notoriety, went barefoot onto the stage. Alongside her, she performed the songs on a borrowed guitar. Bob Gibson, a folk singer, was only 2, yet everything changed for her in those few minutes. Voice as pure and high as nothing the everyone in the crowd had ever heard. Shocked, quiet, all of a sudden this unknown everyone was talking about teenagers. Well-known figures such as Bo Diddley had given a show that evening, but people couldn't stop talking about Joan. Record companies hurried to sign her, and even though she would continue to sing it for many years, even into her 80s, Newport was that one chance encounter, and her tale began in 1959. Barely a year later, at the age of 19, Joan took her first album in a strange location, a summery ballroom at the Manhattan Towers in New York. It wasn't a beautiful hotel. She sat on simply 2 microphones and a filthy rug, recording while attempting to avoid disturbed by bingo games that were played there. There was no elaborate production on Wednesdays, only her guitar and voice, but the unadulterated sincere sound evolved into something unique even though it didn't chart well. Distance, the record ultimately rose to ranking 15 and continued to be on the charts for almost 3 years prior to registering with a large label such as Columbia. Joan selected a Vanguard Records, a smaller one, since they assured her many years of creative freedom. Later, a call from the Library of Congress that record is among the most significant recordings in the history of America prior to Joan's records and festivals had been gently boosting her self-esteem at a Cambridge's Club 47 is a small club. When she made her stage debut, close to Harvard, the room was nearly deserted there, and she was frightened, but things that people couldn't forget about her, she gave off an almost enigmatic vibe. In just a few weeks, the crowds expanded quickly, with lines starting to form down the she went from earning $10 each night on the street to $25, which seemed excessive for a cup of coffee. 1959 house vocalist on that tiny stage served as a test site for her, where she influenced her appearance and voice in front of those who couldn't look, removing the picture that followed her around from the barefooted Madonna in her early years started in Newport, where she performed without shoes. It evolved into more than a peculiar specifics that her bare feet came to symbolize her innocence and defiance of the well-groomed fake side of the music industry. She was regarded as a saint by some, even though she didn't want to be her at one point. Wrote, "I am a noise, not a saint." As time went on, the pressure to be she was in her 80s, but she weighed great. Joan danced after finding a sort of calm. Paris barefoot isn't for the masses, yet only for herself. Finally being free to be in 1961, she knew exactly who she wanted to be. Once again, everything changed when Joan went into a club in Greenwich Village and saw Bob, a rough-looking young man, when Dylan performed. She was already well known, albeit he wasn't, but when she heard him perform a song for Woody, she was deeply moved, and his voice was his lyrics were remarkable despite their lack of polish. She subsequently said that it broke on the inside. She was so beautiful. As soon later, a closer friendship formed. During an event where Dylan played with the song God on Our Side changed Joan's view of him. She realized that he had more than just talent. He was something far bigger. Over the coming for a few years, Joan took advantage of her fame to support Dylan's rise. In 1963, she asked him to join her on stage in front of the Newport Folk Festival. 10,000 people in the audience didn't at first. She embraced him, but she believed she took him on a tour of her, gave him time to perform, and brought his music to large listeners. She dedicated one Queen's concert to over half of her performance was directed towards. She told her admirers that she was singing Dylan's tunes. Bobby Dylan articulates what a lot of individuals I feel old, but I can't explain it. When both of them performed on stage at the March on Washington, which was when Martin the well-known I Have a Dream speech by Luther King Jr. speech, it was evident that Dylan became more than just a songwriter. He had changed into a voice that was moving primarily because of Joan's assistance, but his ascent to fame was complex. By 1965, their relationship had surpassed their collaboration. He invited her to go on a UK tour with him, but once they got there, he kept her away from the on-stage. Joan felt herself lost, feeling confused backstage, and she was devastated, yet unable to comprehend why. Then, he wouldn't let her perform. Dylan abruptly got married to someone else, a pregnant woman named Sarah. Years after having his child, Joan acknowledged, "Dylan crushed my heart. I was just captivated by that ability." For him, the choice was straightforward. Sarah would fit into Joan, wouldn't have wanted him in his life. Authority rather than friendship. Joan endured heartbreak in 1968, yet published a full album with Dylan's compositions. Any Day Now selected the music by extending his closing her with sheet music on the floor eyes and choosing 16 at random. Among the songs that were on the CD were a number Dylan had never recorded. As a result, there were exceptional critiques. Praised her voice, especially her eerie performance of Tears of Rage, that she even designed the album's cover herself. It was not merely a record. It was her method of taking in all they had gone through, all of that together. In the summer of 1963, Joan, they had lost. When she was just 22 years old, Baez played in front of a sizable audience at She Sang We during the March on Washington will triumph right before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his Well known I Speak in a Dream, Joan had sensed the racism she experienced as a child. Her mother was Mexican, while her father was the Scottish, and their family had to deal with bias that she was motivated by lifetime struggle for justice. Just 4 years before, she had gotten her large, currently taking a break at the Newport Folk Festival. Her voice was echoing throughout an anthem performed by the National Mall that would always be connected to her. What the March on Washington brought roughly 250,000 persons collectively, the majority of it aided in pushing Black Americans to advance the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and Joan's Voting Rights Act of 1965 voice played a role in that pivotal moment. Not only a vocalist but also a representation of how music has the power to inspire and transform people. Globe in March 1965, 2 years later, Joan participated in yet another historic demonstration. These marches from Selma to Montgomery came following Bloody Sunday. When everything were calm, the marchers were viciously assaulted by officers on the Joan Eden Pettus Bridge. Thousands of people walked the 54-mile course. Travel to Montgomery. Images from the moment demonstrates her position among the marchers, conversing and listening while participating in. As the final night approaches, rally in the state capital of Alabama, she performed at a show called Stars for Freedom with musicians such as Nana Harry Belafonte and Simone Tony Bennett. It was more than just a show. It was a later that year president, a call to action. The voting rights were signed by Lyndon Johnson. She also declined to play at the act into law. Locations that upheld segregation in the early 1960s, numerous universities in the South still refused to let Joan and Black students decline to perform at venues that supported certain regulations. Instead, she decided to perform in colleges that are traditionally Black and colleges. This was a brave decision, dangerous and possibly hazardous for her career. At a Miles College performance, she got to Alabama right before the Bull Connor, the infamous police chief, was directing widespread arrests in the surrounding. Joan from Birmingham stayed at one of the only motel nearby that permitted both. Martin is joined by Black and white visitors. She didn't follow Luther King Jr. and his crew, just discussed the justice she experienced. In 1964, Joan Baez took a risk by resisted paying 60% of her taxes. She stated the funds would be used to. This act became national during the Vietnam War. It was one of the first significant periods of wartime tax resistance. Others adopted a movement and followed her example. But this didn't lead her to jail. Her demonstrations intensified in 1967. She was twice arrested for obstructing the Oakland Military Center's entrance. Her mother was with her in California. Both spent more than a month in prison. This was viewed by many as a powerful act of nonviolent opposition. By the early in the 1970s, many of people refused to pay levies that funded the war, some of which even refused to cover their phone bills despite being aware of the military was then financed by those taxes. Joan accomplished a couple things in December 1972. Daring to do, she immediately entered she visited a conflict zone in North Vietnam, accompanied by a gathering of peace activists there. The intention was to deliver Christmas letters to American inmates and express worries regarding human rights, while at the same time they were. The US launched a major bombing there. Campaign for 11 days over Hanoi. Joan remained in a hotel bunker during the bombing fell above, and she captured everything on camera. Youngsters playing in ruins, explosions, and a service on Christmas Eve that had to be interrupted due to the bombing. She subsequently stated that it was the first time she really confronted the notion of her own demise. That encounter remained with her throughout her remaining years. Even prior to that journey, Joan was constructing. She utilized money in 1965 for something larger. From her profession in music to begin the Institute for Nonviolence Research, she began it with Ira Sand, her tutor, Pearl in California's Carmel Valley, but locals concerned that not everyone welcomed them. Hippies would visit the Institute, and they attempted to stop it from causing havoc via the legal system, but Joan refused to. She reopened the school discreetly, and in December, the Institute imparted knowledge from individuals such as Thoreau students, and Gandhi learned to write, talk, and plan nonviolent demonstrations that remained in Carmel Valley for 4 years before relocating to Palo Alto, which subsequently turned into the Resource Santa Cruz Center for Nonviolence. Despite everything, Joan kept talking. She assisted in publishing a full-page advertisement in major newspapers. It was critical of the human rights government of Vietnam abuses. Thus, she requested that they cease the torture and allow their detention facilities to. Jane Fonda disagreed with outsiders saying supported the Vietnamese government and sent a letter expressing disapproval of Joan's activities that surprised many when they fell out. It was demonstrated in the peace movement that deep disparities could exist even among comrades. Exist in 1991, at the age of 50 for Joan Baez. Aged, she penned a stirring letter to her parents, whom she thought had been mistreated as a child by her father, denied it and accepted those recollections were untrue, claiming to have been planted by he referred to it as false memory. Nevertheless, although Joan was uncertain about the precise information, thought something had occurred in a subsequent documentary in which you are never totally sure, he explained. However, even if 20% was genuine, it was sufficient to cause the destruction it did. In spite of the suffering, she ultimately came to forgive her father. Prior to his passing in 2007, close to the end of as he sat in his life, she sang to him. His wheelchair was a silently moving. Some of her pain during their time together appeared in her songs and poetry alongside. She also struggled with anxiety. As a result, panic attacks, despair, and awful sleeplessness became so severe that even when she was delighted, she would swiftly ruin it. Felt like a never-ending statement, she said. Her relationship was even impacted by her mental state. She acknowledged with her son Gabriel, "I was frequently absent from his support. I was present, but I was not." The things changed in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Immediately following the conclusion of the Vietnam War, Joan, she previously resorted to booze because she felt lost, claimed that tequila was her new best friend. Although it began as a jest, it revealed the reality of external, not internal, factors. Strength put an end to her addiction and her path. With treatment having begun early she became a psychologist in 1957 at the age of 16. Informed her parents that she had a lot of emotional issues and a strong feeling of being unsatisfactory on the initial visit, started a long-term connection with. Over the years, she saved money on therapy, hundreds of treatment cassette tapes, records of her sessions, attempting to make feeling of her life, even after decades of continued to create, releasing one in 1970. Day at a Time is a startling album. There were a lot of country music recordings of it. Bradley's Barn Studio in Tennessee, and marked her foray into the world of country music. This wasn't entirely unexpected. David Harris's then husband adored. He also had a powerful voice in country music. Opposed to the Vietnam War and participated in jail for declining to engage in combat while Baez recorded the album while incarcerated, which was in line with David's album, another record with a country influence. She wrote Sweet Sir Galahad because she adored it for David, and a song for her sister Mimi for her spouse, displaying a different aspect of herself for a few years. As a songwriter, Baez had already taken another creative take, a chance this time by listening to classical music. From 1966 until 1968, she collaborated with Peter Schickel, a composer who was also known as for his humorous persona, PDQ Bach. Together, they created three quite distinct. The first Noel album was a Christmas album featuring a lot of traditional songs. It was orchestrated in its entirety, showed a more deliberate course of action. She didn't hesitate to distance herself from the audience. In 1974, she created another daring step into another. She released Gracias Olvida in a language that nearly all of the songs on the CD are in Spanish. Only a few months' time was crucial. Victor Jara, a former Chilean folk singer, had died at the hands of the new military. The government wished to pay tribute to him and he was liked by others, but Spanish wasn't. She sung passionately in her own tongue and proficiency, even when singing the song's Live, the song that would characterize her then came. Career. It all began with an unexpected. In a 1974 phone conversation, Dylan revealed the Lily Rosemary, the lyrics of his new song, and the Jack of Hearts during a pay period with her phone that brings back a flood of memories. Viz thought back on their history and wrote Rust and Diamonds, which exquisitely encapsulated the depth of their relationship. The remarks were sincere and poetic, recalling Dylan as the untidy feeling is the ultimate, a vagrant with bluer eyes than Robin. Steve Jobs was immediately drawn to eggs. To the knowledge of Baez, and their friendship quickly turned into an important relationship that lasted 3 years of employment, even considering marriage, but was hesitant since he knew he wanted a family, which isn't achievable with having previously raised a teenager. Baez. A remarkable event happened at a Ralph Lauren shop after Jobs recommended Baez ought to wear a bright red gown. When she stated that she was unable to pay, he purchased it for her without hesitancy, followed by Kim Jones' relationship with a lady named Kim was nearly unknown at the time, although Baez openly talked about it at a 1972 interview and brought up the subject again in her 2023's I Am a Noise Kim documentary represented a spirit of freedom. Disregarding public opinion, Baez remembered them walking together, walking around town wearing boots and suspenders and disheveled hair. Comparing themselves to this partnership gave Baez access to ruffians, a novel viewpoint on love, one that was comforting following her experiences with men. She believed that leaving this out a portion of her memoir's narrative would have remained dishonest even today. Joan Baez keeps climbing the tree behind him. Her house throughout the summer, she frequently climbs up into its branches to sleep, calling the encounter magical. Birds soar close that she can sense them. She once felt the wind from their wings, fell while descending, suffering and harm that necessitated a hospital stay. Nevertheless, she still favors the tree over going to a therapist, as she states, "My therapist is a tree." Each morning, Baez dances barefoot even in her 80s for after 15 minutes, she shifts to the sounds of Everything Was released by the Gypsy Kings. Other than that, she says, it raises her mood and keeps her centered. She had a solo art show in 2020. Display with photographs of freedom fighters and campaigners who were praised by 2021. She arranged a second display of figures like Greta Thunberg, Kamala Harris, and the title of Dr. Fauci's artwork of Fauci online. Trust received a lot of attention. Through her artistic endeavors, she continued to persistent pursuit of justice, merely with a distinct media. The documentary Joan Baez's I Am a Noise, which was released in 2023, discovered tales she had never revealed prior to her being open and honest on the maltreatment she experienced as a youngster at her father's hands, and repeated incredibly intimate poems, many of which she wrote poems as part of her rehabilitation sessions during the 1990s, and were impacted by different facets of her character. Instead of concentrating on rumors or her poetry's romantic entanglements focuses on topics related to childhood memory. Among them, recovery and personal development is a poem that subtly honors Bob Dylan with only a few of lines considering the bright young man from Duluth.